I'm John Banther, and this is Classical Breakdown. From WETA Classical in Washington, we are your guide to classical music. In this episode, I'm joined by violinist Laura Colgate. She is the concert leader of the National Philharmonic Orchestra and is a co-founder of Boulanger Initiative, an organization that advocates for women and all gender-marginalized composers and seeks to redefine the canon. She joins me to talk all about Boulanger Initiative, what they do, and their upcoming festival. But first, we talk about a living composer we think you should know, Clarice Assad, and share with you 3 works to listen to and what we love about her music. Thank you so much for joining me, Laura. I think it's been quite a while since you and I have shared the same stage, maybe even like more than a decade.
Oh, definitely more than a decade. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you, and we're going to talk about the Boulanger Initiative, but first, we're going to talk about a living composer, and one, I guess, that you also know quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. Clarice Assad.
So let's talk a little bit about, before we get into a couple of her works, let's talk about, well, where she's from, what she's doing. So Clarice Assad, she's a Grammy-nominated composer and pianist, and she has a number of styles that her music encompasses. She was born in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil, in 1978 to a pretty musical family, and it sounds like, Laura, this would have been really a big part of her own musical education. Her father is the guitarist Sergio Assad. Her aunt is Badi Assad, the singer-songwriter. So I assume naturally she got a lot of learning from these people when she was young.
Definitely. She was surrounded by music her whole life, and you can really hear it in her works, what she was surrounded by.
So she also studied further at Roosevelt University in Chicago and also University of Michigan, where she studied with Michael Dougherty. One thing that struck me, Laura, just looking at her, in general, just looking at her website, she's written an incredible amount of music, like almost like, is this too much? The Philadelphia Orchestra, Chicago Sinfonietta, Albany Symphony, so many people have commissioned her for works, but it sounds like for her, when you commission her, it's not just, she writes, here's your piece, thank you, here's your check, and so forth.
Yeah, for sure.
It's more of she wants to know a lot about you, everything about you, it seems.
Yeah, she definitely gets to know her audience, who she's writing for, and writes for people, and you can tell.
And I guess if you want to call it a big break, she had a break in 2004 when her violin concerto was programmed in a concert by Marin Alsop, and then Nadia Salerno-Sonnenberg, she also later recorded it. So she's been in this and doing this for decades.
Yeah, and that's a really incredible concerto. The way that she writes for the violin is pretty spectacular.
Have you played it?
I have not played it. I've listened to it a lot. It is really a challenging concerto.
Well, we're also going to put playlists and stuff like that up on the show notes page of her music. But let's go into our first piece. This is Sin Fronteras, which she wrote in 2017 in English, Without Borders. And this one is so much fun, Laura, because, well, one, I love how it opens so warm and inviting, like a huge vista, but then there's like this chromaticism, like on your peripheral. It just sounds like very, very cinematic in a way.
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of her music is cinematic, but definitely this piece and the beginning, you really feel these big chords, the surges, the ebbs and the flows, and it makes you almost enveloped in the sound.
Enveloped, I like that. And then also you hear this little tune come in, and you want to keep this in your back pocket, especially how there's like a little quick turn of notes. That comes back quite often. Let's read some of the program notes that she wrote for this because, like I always say, sometimes or oftentimes, composers are just as intentional about the words they use to describe their music as they are the notes themselves. Here's what she wrote. Sin Fronteras emerged from a utopian state of mind in which I found myself one day, daring to erase imaginary lines that disconnect us geographically, culturally, and morally, boundaries that the human race has willingly subscribed to for thousands of years. But what would happen if the walls that separate us from getting to know one another were not there? While this idea would generate a fair amount of confusion in the real world, in the realm of music of the 21st century, this does not need to be so. As a South American woman living in the United States for 2 decades, I chose sounds of places that felt closest to home, the Americas. In Sin Fronteras, we journey from the bottom of South America, traveling up both coasts and navigating to the northern hemisphere via Central America. The piece follows no storyline, but its central concept begins with a shocking reaction between two or more distinct cultures coming into contact for the first time. After the initial resistance, everyone collectively begins aggregating each other's ethnic fragments into their cultural spheres to create something new while still preserving their original roots. And those are some important sentences right there. She's so descriptive, Laura, yet she also says there's no narrative necessarily to this as well, but it also has that cinematic quality to it. There's not a lot of,
Right.
I don't know another composer with this kind of sound and idea.
Yeah, for sure. And you can visualize so real the cinematic qualities in this, and it really is bringing in all of these different cultures.
She has one more bit on it. She writes, "The piece accomplishes this amalgamation effect by taking advantage of an old-time favorite musical form, theme, and variation. Though it may not fit precisely into the cookie-cutter format of this old tradition, there are several moments in the piece where familiar sounds, melodies, and motifs come and go, grounding the listener for a moment before morphing into something new." And that's what I meant by, keep that little melody in your back pocket, because it's so characteristic compared to the other things, and you hear it coming in and out in little fragments, as she described.
Yeah, the cinematic-ness of it all. I picture traveling through the Americas on horseback, and the different grooves. It really brings you into the fun aspect, and you can't not dance and move with it.
The groove part is so important. She has such a great grasp and understanding of rhythm, not just, measure to measure, but big picture as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also she has a great sense of harmony and voicing, like voice leading. There's this clarinet solo once the music has kind of taken off. And there's this chromaticism in it that makes it feel like it's just kind of flipping and sliding around or something. It basically, to me, sounds more improvisatory.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a lot of that in her music, improvisation aspects.
For sure.
Now, you said groove, and that's important because we hear it throughout. And there's this low brass groove that transitions into this moment, Laura, that I think is so special. We hear these musicians whispering and murmuring all of a sudden, and this works. How many times have we, sat in an orchestra and done something that is written into the music that's not music related, and it just doesn't land?
It doesn't work, but it really, really works, and it's a really cool moment.
And it's also interesting to hear it through headphones, because it also catches you off guard.
Yeah, for sure.
Sound.
Yeah, you definitely don't expect it when it comes.
I imagine this is, in a way, the cultures coming together, like we just in two groups, we both walk into a field together, and it's like, oh, who's this?
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after this moment, Laura, there is something in the music that I've really been thinking about after reading what she wrote, because we have these hand claps in the music. I hear hand claps, clapping way less than something like a shout like mambo or something in music. And it feels like here she's using it in an intentionally kind of humanistic way. All of these people are together, and it's this clap that gets your attention, and it's like calling you to a dance. I mean, you said you got to dance the whole time.
You have to. You can't help it.
And so I really started thinking about that. What does that mean in the context of this story or not story that she's bringing out? And maybe it returns later and it changes.
Yeah, I think it really brings the musicians in a different way, and lets you, become more human with the music, interact with it in a different way.
It also sounds like, with all of the fragments, when she's mentioning this theme and variations as things come and go, grounding you, and then developing into something new, I love how we have these moments where it sounds like cultures really are coming together in a way that's like we're holding up, taking shirts and clothes off rack, holding it up to each other, exchanging candy or music and food, little conversations. That's
Yeah.
what I'm really getting.
I think of puzzle pieces kind of fitting together, or maybe not so much fitting together sometimes,
Oh, wow.
and clashing with each other. And sometimes they fit perfectly, and sometimes they don't fit at all.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm wondering, after listening to her music, and since you know her, does she like Stravinsky?
I don't know if she likes Stravinsky, and I mean, personally, I've never asked her that question. But
It's not a
listening
normal
to
question.
It's not a normal question. Listening to her music, I think it's safe to assume that she loves Stravinsky.
I think so too. There's the voicing and the rhythm sometimes, it's just like, you just kind of turn your head a little bit. Wow, this is a totally different way of doing that.
Well, and she uses very explicit Stravinsky rhythms and even motifs sometimes. It's very obvious.
And that hand clapping moment when it comes back again, it's not clapping anymore. It's a castanet. It's moved into something else. I also wonder, what is, why was that decision made? Is it another humanistic aspect, or is it just a musical difference, or something? I don't know.
I really think of, in the beginning, the whispers and the murmurs, and that becomes more real with the clapping, and then the clapping transforms and morphs into castanets, and it's sort of this journey throughout the journey, in Americas, and you can sense the journey with all of these different elements too.
And I think it also helps when it's getting more raucous, because she uses great snare writing and a lot of little details in the snare writing. But in the end, it's not a snare, it's on the hi-hat.
Yeah. There's some really fun percussion parts in this piece.
So Sin Fronteras is definitely a piece that we enjoy and think you will as well. Also, so interesting to hear this music from someone from South America, from Brazil. So many composers, so much of music that we have that's from a different place. It's someone going there for a little bit, Debussy, Saint-Saëns, and they just try to bring it back in some way, but this feels very different.
Yeah, it's home for her.
The next piece we want to talk about, the one we just heard was composed in 2017. This one is from 2014, Godai, The Five Elements. I love this one. This features pianist Ina Fawix, and if you don't know who she is, you should also be listening to her as well. She does several things like this, combining text and poetry within music. But what does it mean, Laura, for a work for speaking pianist? That's a very distinct instrument.
Oh, it's not something that we hear too often, and even for a pianist to use their voice in any way, but, speaking and making different sounds, but then also having to sing. It's not easy, especially for pianists who haven't been trained in it.
No, this is totally out of your comfort zone. And even if you're a musician, you've done it your whole life, you're going to get nervous when you're doing something or anxious out of your comfort zone until it becomes comfortable.
Yeah, and I think Ina Fawix does an incredible job with it.
Yes. I think with speaking pianist, this is different than things we've talked about in the past. We recently, a few months ago, talked about Copland's Lincoln Portraits, where you have a person speaking at a microphone. They're naturally taking the focus. But here the pianist is doing both. The parts are intertwined in a way that can't be separated. So the first movement is Dry Bones, Wind, and here's what she wrote. Godai stands for the five elements in the system of Japanese Buddhism: wind, fire, water, earth, and sky. The programmatic piece is a series of 5 interconnected sketches with spoken sound effects and 2 poems. The first movement, Dry Bones, Wind, serves as an introduction with wind-like sound effects and a poem of a dry landscape where the wind carries leaves. Assad says it represents expansion, freedom, movement, hence the breath sounds. Some places are meant to feel like something is about to take flight. This is stunning, especially the opening with these striking chords and then this shh sound that she does. And it's just almost in a way like the snare writing. There's so many details to it. I've not seen the music, but I imagine there's a lot of information too.
Yeah, we talk about, how her music is so cinematic, and you can really visualize wind and flight and, leaves moving around and that kind of thing in this movement.
In time, all light settles uncontained on the whole spectrum of an October maple.
I also like how the piano reacts to the text. Like when she says, the word maple, it really takes off. And when she's describing different colors and how the piano interacts with that, it's just
It's almost a cue. As soon as she says a different color, it changes the mode that you're in.
Maybe almost improvisatory too, because it's like that next moment can't exist until this moment happens.
Yeah.
I love that reaction. And there's so much happening, and the movement's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds long.
Yeah, and
Not
you,
even.
you get so much within those 2 minutes. It's really incredible how much she can fit in.
Yes. Now, the second movement, Absence, Fire, and Water. Do you want to read for us what she wrote?
Sure. In the poem of the second movement, Absence, Fire, and Water, an author laments about a manuscript lost in a fire. Two forces are at work here, ominous, fiery rhythms and transparent, light, water-like runs.
This is beautiful, turbulent, and contrasting. I love the opening of this. I like poetry. I mean, everyone likes poetry, I think, right? But when she says absence smells like an ocean of grass on fire, and then, the accident of its origin, the way that comes out and the way that the piano part is written, it seems like some kind of massive, very lonely feeling moment in the music. If you see like 1,000 acres in front of you on fire.
Absence smells like an ocean of grass on fire. The accident of its origin, a crossroad. Souls sold, maps lie flat, flattening years.
Yeah, and the first movement, I feel like a lot of times whatever happens in the voice, the vocal part is what affects the piano part, whereas I think this movement, I feel almost the opposite way, that the piano is affecting the vocal part of it and creates the poem almost.
Yes, because I think that's what it is about with the piano being inseparable from the text.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of this where, it's just really rolling out with these chords in ways that you could rehearse this with a speaker, but you can't, I guess you could, but it would not sound like this.
Nothing to slake endless thirst, and I can think of nothing but water.
Oh, that would be very difficult to
Yes.
pull off, I think. Having the same person doing the rolling chords and being able to speak, you can't separate them that way.
And it feels like this is like a depiction of absence rather than us feeling intensely absent or lonely ourselves. The next movement is Earth, and she writes, the third, Gravity, Earth, is reminiscent of sound effects from No Theater, rattling trills, humming, taps, silences, and lots of textural contrast, while the left-hand octaves march in slow, heavy steps. The quick conversational lines in the right hand and the intermittent trills seem to be fighting gravity to lead into the fourth movement. Now, how familiar are you, Laura, with 14th century Japanese theater? No. Are you an expert on this?
Not at all.
No.
Are you?
No. In fact, when I saw this, I thought, this is interesting, and I go to look it up, thinking, 14th century, maybe there's some people doing like, traditional or period performances of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing, there's not going to be a lot. No, it's still happening. It's the longest form of continuous theater, like I think on Earth,
Yeah.
like for all of these centuries. And the music, you can hear it right now with this, this is Lion Dance from Shakyo, and you can just really hear how it lines up. Or you can hear how there's a corollary there. No text in this one, though. Nothing. I like how this feels less like Western notated music
Mm-hmm.
than the others. It feels like each beat, those big heavy steps that she talks about, they're not quite even. Like there's a big beat, and then there's a certain amount of action that has to happen before we go to the next beat.
Yeah, it feels like choreography or some sort of experimental choreography almost.
Yeah. I almost think, like, is this the Earth forming? Like coming together billions of years ago? And that's kind of what's being depicted. I don't know, but it's just, it's very striking, and I love how it feels rhythmically very different. The next movement is Ascension, or Sky, and she did not write a lot for this. What did she write, Laura?
Ascension ends the set with its whirl of hypnotic repeating 16th note groups and contrasting dynamics.
I mean, that's pretty succinct, but that's pretty much what happens with this. Now, the last one had some singing, but this one has no text or any vocal sounds at all compared to the other ones.
Yeah, and it's thinking of looking up at the sky and the endless sky, it has that sense of never ending.
Yeah. This also gives a question or an idea of, what is our listening experience with something like this? Because she's right in our ears talking, as opposed to a recording of, her on stage, and then we're hearing from a distance her speaking. It provides a very intimate, I think, experience that you cannot get in a concert experience. And we talked about this with the cello suites by J.S. Bach, which are more intimate and more enjoyable by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's something so, and she even says hypnotic about it, but thinking about listening to this movement specifically with earphones on and just getting lost in the sounds.
Get lost. That's what don't get lost, but I love getting lost in this. The third piece we want to highlight is called Sonic Landscape. This is the most recent one, and this was composed in 2022. What did she write for this one, Laura?
Sonic Landscape is a sparkling original musical work for piano and string quartets. It draws on classical music and Brazilian jazz, enhanced with passages of improvisation to create a unique listening experience each time. Sonic Landscape celebrates diversity and the embracing of multiple styles of music in vibrant harmony.
Also a nice, succinct description for this work that's in 3 movements. And so far we've talked about, this sounds improvisatory, this section here or this section here. But this one, as you read, it's enhanced with passages of improvisation, which for some string players, I imagine, might give some anxiety, because that's not something we've been doing in classical
there's
music.
butterflies that come with improvisation. And, some musicians are more familiar with it than others, but certainly it's not built into classical musician training at all.
No. So the first movement is called Continuum. This has a very fun, playful opening, and then a very familiar sound in the piano, and we'll keep that in our back pocket for later. But when I'm getting from this, and I'm thinking about the title Continuum, I'm thinking about this is not just mixing of the genres of classical music and Brazilian jazz, which she has a lot of great Brazilian jazz recordings too, which we'll put up. But it's more rather that you can mix these two colors together to get 1,000 different other shades and colors. And that's what we hear through this, where there's moments where it's more one or the other, or a mixture of the two.
Yeah, and I think specifically to the beginning of this movement, it so reminds me of her personality. She has this really playfulness about her, and you can really hear it here.
And the improvisatory sections come only after a couple of minutes. And what's nice about how she approaches this as well is that it's not very segmented in terms of there's so many works where you get to a hit and then now we have the solo section and then we go back to something else. But rather this just flows right in and flows right out. Yeah. And with the ensemble playing the chord changes, this adds a whole new dimension to the work. And there's, again, how many people do we have here? This is a piano quintet, string quartet and piano, yet we have such a rich and different sound than we're used to with this kind of ensemble.
It really seems like there's more than 5 musicians.
It really does. It really, really does. Now, the second movement, Circular Motion, this opens with a repeating cello line that had me thinking, Laura, is this like a Passacaglia or a chaconne or something? It made me think of that. And then I thought, no, that's silly. That's not what it is. But I was looking before at what she said, it's the theme and variations, but not really. It's not the actual cookie cutter definition of that. And so maybe there's an idea of that here because we have this repeating line that continues mostly throughout. And even when it disappears, those little fragments or elements of it ground you, as she says.
Yeah, the cello repeating line, it almost reminds you of Pachelbel Canon and, just loops over and over again.
Now, this is a great movement for cello because there's improvisation for the cello in the middle. I don't know if she said if it's in the music, like, okay, cello improvises here or in violin and viola here or whatever. But we know, especially in ballads, a lower instrument, like bowed, string, bass, and a jazz ballad, so beautiful. It has this very particular sound that I think if she's doing it intentionally, she's exploiting here.
Well, she improvises so much, so frequently, and she's so adept at it. And you can tell that this is not written out for the instruments, that they have to improvise on it.
And I'm wondering why, when you hear this piece played, the piano part, it's improvisatory sounding, but you don't really tell that it's so much of a sudden improvisation because it's just very seamlessly brought in and out there. And then the cello turns into like a string bass, and it's like got these pizzicato lines that's like, basically it sounds like it's turning it into a jazz combo with this. This movement, it's called circular motion, but it feels like we never quite take off. I'm thinking of when she says about another piece, like, it never really, it feels like it's going somewhere or it's taking off, but it never
really does.
Yeah, it never really does.
Yeah.
It feels like we're trying to, and then it slows down. Then we're trying to. And then this one ends in a very cliffhanger way. It's a springboard for the last movement, which is called Rodapau. And I think this is related to that children's song, Rodapau. It's like a Brazilian children's song about like those big spinning tops that they can, with a string you can rip and, spin and play games and stuff.
Yeah, and it sounds like a top too, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so, but she has it in one word. The kid song is in 2 words. That's just to say, I think that's, definitely...
Her inspiration.
Yeah. Now, Laura, specifically, you have to answer for us. There's some kind of percussive sound happening in the violin.
So this is called coleño, and it almost sounds like castanets, but this is a technique where when you're using the bow, instead of playing with the hair, you turn it and you use the wood side of the bow, so it becomes a percussion instrument.
Okay, is that coleño batuto or is that a...
Coleño batuto.
Okay, because the way it it's like a little...
Yeah.
It's like a little percussion instrument.
Yeah,
Okay.
She builds the groove into the violin bow.
Okay, I didn't know that it was the back of the bow. I was kind of thinking it was something about like maybe right at the end, like the frog, like,
Oh, no. I mean, it's very simple, like just literally flipping the bow around so you're holding it upside down.
Okay, well, don't tell everyone it's simple. It's difficult.
Well, sometimes you want to not use your real bow for that because it can get damaged. So
Yes.
You'll bring a backup bow when you have to play coleño.
Yeah, people don't necessarily know that bows cost as much as nice cars, very nice cars. Now, I've mentioned and I've kind of preloaded this, talking about Stravinsky and some of these familiar sounds. There's a moment she quotes directly Petrushka. Yep. The way she gets out of it is like borrowing from the Petrushka rhythm, but in this Brazilian jazz way that is just, it's just so much fun. And I think that's what I say a lot. I find myself just saying, this is just fun. It's just,
so
fun,
much
exciting
of her music is just fun.
Now, there's another violin technique or something that happens. And again, to mention Stravinsky, I think it's that familiar sound that most audiences know from Firebird. What is happening here? This it sounds like when I was a kid and I used to pull the straw in and out of my McDonald's
Yeah.
cup and make everyone mad.
Or even when you put water on the rim of the cup and your finger goes in a circle around it and creates that sound. These are called harmonics on the violin. Essentially, when you normally create a sound, your left hand fingers will push the string all the way down so that it touches the fingerboard and creates a shorter string, essentially. But with harmonics, you have to just barely touch the string. So you're not really pushing it down. And it'll cause the string to divide into whatever fraction, depending on which harmonic you want. So if you touch, directly halfway in the middle of the string, it gives you an octave above what that string would be. And it creates a very ethereal tone.
And you can slide your finger around while you do it, and it just kind of picks out the ones that naturally speak. Or
so with real harmonics, you have to touch it in exactly the right place to get the harmonic. But with false harmonics, you can use one finger to sort of anchor the string and push it all the way down, and then a higher finger to create that false harmonic by barely touching it, and then you can sort of move it around. And she has both false and real harmonics here.
Oh, okay. So that's what's going on. That's usually the part I'm sort of falling asleep in Firebird.
Before you get woken up very rudely.
Yes, I'll be honest, that's happened to me back there in the back row. Well, we just showcased a couple of her works there, really just kind of showing you the aspects that we love about her music. So we highly recommend you go to the show notes page. We're going to have some more resources, a link to her website, a playlist, and more. But she is a living composer that should definitely be on everyone's radar. And we will talk next about the Boulanger Initiative right after this. Hey YouTube listeners, are you enjoying the music of Clarice Assad? We are really just scratching the surface. So please, tell us what you like about her music in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So Laura, maybe just the best first question to ask is, for everyone that doesn't know, what is Boulanger Initiative?
Yeah, sure. Boulanger Initiative is an advocacy nonprofit organization based in the DMV in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And we exist to uncover the music of women and gender marginalized composers from history all the way through living composers.
When did it start?
About 6.5 years ago. So this coming summer, we will turn 7.
7, okay. And part of it, what I see a lot is also the phrase redefining the canon. What does that mean?
So the canon is the pieces that really have built the culture of classical music. When you see the same sort of composers and pieces time and time again, and they're very recognizable. The Tchaikovsky and the Beethoven and the Mozart and the Bach. This is what we think of as the canon. And when we look at the pieces that make up that canon, it's exclusively written by white men, mostly European men, and trying to, build gender equity in classical music. Women have always been writing music, and there are so many fantastic pieces that should be included in the canon that aren't. So we exist to bring those pieces to light, to make sure that they're getting played on stages and taught in schools, and people are actually learning about these composers who have really fallen out of history.
That's always a great point to mention every time. Women have always been composing, and that's not going to change. Like, the first novel was written by a woman. And I think when we look at, how this is working out, or why we would even want or need to do this for things, way in the past. For example, Florence Price is a great composer that we've now come to know.
Sure.
And her symphonies are being recorded and performed. Oh, by the way, did you ever hear of Florence Price when you were at school with me at
Never.
New England Conservatory?
No.
Neither did I.
Never.
And she went to that school.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have her, and we have records of her. She was alive in the last century. We have things, but if you go back centuries, there was still great music written by women in the Baroque period, which we don't have all those details. As you said, it's harder to research these
It's
things.
very time consuming. It takes a lot of time and effort to find the resources and pull them together. And this is where our database really comes in to build a resource, to have something that musicians and teachers can go to pull resources out of really quickly. And right now, the database is the largest database in the world of repertoire by non-living women composers. And, we talk about women have always been writing music. There are several women from BC era even in there. And, obviously going back that far, it's very difficult to find resources and information about those people. But, even as far back as the Baroque period, we have a curriculum that was released last year on Baroque era women composers, and there's almost 70 composers featured in there. And most musicians can't even name one composer from the Baroque era.
Wow. Now, we're going to talk about the database in a moment. Everyone can take advantage of it. But you said, 70 composers from the Baroque era specifically?
From the Baroque era alone.
Yeah.
And that's, just the composers that we've included in the curriculum that we released.
And if you tell someone name 10 or name 70 Baroque composers, period, they're not going to be able to. So the point is, there is fantastic music that was used in its own way, written and composed in these time periods, which there's zero reason why it should not also be in our lexicon. Telemann wrote hundreds of concertos. A lot of them sound the same, and that wasn't like necessarily a criticism. That's just how music was back then. And there's no reason why we can't enjoy, for example, a composer by who can we name a Baroque composer now?
Barbara Strozzi.
Barbara
is
Strozzi,
one that has a huge output and really, really gorgeous works. A lot of vocal works, but the most disheartening thing about it is that a lot of these women composers, when they were living, they were well known. Their works were getting played. They had household names. They were part of the canon during their day, and they have just literally fallen out of history.
So let's talk about the database here, because this was an extraordinary undertaking. It seems like, if you're just trying to find these composers, or what if you just go to Google, you type it in? That's not really what's happening. But to explain the database, you already did a little bit. It's a database, a repository of music written by women or gender nonconforming composers that are already dead, and it stretches back thousands of years into BC, and you can literally, I'm just kind of explaining how I use it.
Sure.
If I'm looking for, I want something from the Baroque period, and I want it to be like a trio sonata, I just go in to the database. I can just, do a search like that and pull everything up. But why don't you tell us more about...
Yeah, sure. It's really for everyone, and there's so many different ways to search within it. Right now we have... over 1,500 composers included in there, and we are almost to 15,000 works. We're just coming up onto 15,000 works in there, and really, you can explore a composer's entire output and look at all of their pieces, or if you're a conductor and you're looking for pieces for your orchestra, and you have a French program and you really want to put a piece by a French woman composer from history, maybe from the Impressionist era, you can go in and click on French and make your dates choices and find the range that you want the composer to be from, and even put in how long the piece is and the instrumentation. And the database will give you all of the pieces within our database that fit any of those categories.
And also there's links to performances if they're available, or recording. So you can literally look for it and then listen to it. Or even look at the score. I think there's some links if they're available.
If there's a score available for purchase or for digital download even, there are links for that. One of the most important and exciting things to me about the database is that, a lot of these pieces from history, we have maybe the the original holograph or a manuscript of it, but it hasn't actually been published.
Yeah.
And we'll have manuscript locations in there. So anybody who is interested in engraving a piece and in publishing a piece can go in and click on that button and find a huge amount of works that haven't been published yet, because this is work that should be, being done right now. And the same thing goes for recordings. You can, go in and find the pieces that haven't been recorded. If you're a musician and you're interested in recording an entire album of previously unrecorded works by X composer, you can go in and find which ones haven't been recorded yet.
There's a couple of ways to use a database for, I think, the average listener. What I say is, when you're listening to something and you like it, for instance, there's the Vivaldi Project, and they have a lot of Baroque composers. I'm blanking on the name of this American Baroque composer, for example, but it's this great trio sonata. And if you're enjoying something, it just takes a second to just go to the database and think, it's this time period that I'm listening to this piece, this area of the world, or you can also, take that out, and you can find your next thing to enjoy. It's like, I love records. I like collecting or listening to records, and I buy stuff that I don't even know what it is because it looks so interesting.
Awesome. I love that.
Mm-hmm. I think the database is more than that, right? It's more than just we're trying to find another piece to listen
Absolutely.
to. It's redefining it. You said people going on to search for a piece of music, maybe to create a program or to be included. Is this also like orchestras? I mean, that's like the most visible thing. We've played in orchestras.
Yep.
Those are the institutions with usually the venues, the halls, and the income to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
How are they using this, or how has that been affecting?
Yeah, we really think of the Boulanger Initiative database as the heart of our organization, and more as a starting point than an ending point. It's such a rabbit hole that you can just spend hours and hours in there. But once you've found a composer or a piece that you love, continuing on that path and finding out more about their lives and their music and their works and the time period and all of that, that it really is, we build all of these education programs and other programs around it. And one of those programs is Redefining the Canon. And this exists for orchestras. Orchestras are, you look at different industries throughout the world, if you're talking about science or visual art, and classical music is further behind in gender equity than almost any other industry. And if you look at what American orchestras are playing these days, now that there's more works by living composers being played, gender equity has gotten better, but this is almost a cop-out to say, I'm going to add pieces by living women composers. It's so much easier to reach gender equity doing that, and to actually have to go back in history and find pieces by non-living women composers. It takes more time, it takes more energy, and really a lot of focused effort to do that. And when we look at the output of these American orchestras today, it's still less than 2% of what they're performing each season is by non-living or dead women composers. And it's, you look at even the amount of music that's being played by any women, living or dead, and it's still less than, when you put Mozart and Beethoven and Bach together, that we're still seeing less even living women composers being performed by orchestras. So we have a long way to go in the industry, and the database is really a starting point for conductors, for musicians of orchestras to start on the journey of finding more pieces to include on their programs.
This also reminds me of the idea and the practice of, if you don't want certain people to feel like they belong, or that they are part of a community, or even welcome, or even people at all, you don't depict them in media.
Sure.
You don't depict them, you don't show them. And if you do, you do in a very particular way. And that's the unfortunate part when it comes to, okay, we're programming more music by a woman, but it's just these living women composers who may not even be getting the actual same pay for a commission that they may not otherwise get, as opposed to someone going to a concert, a young person, and saying, oh, wow, we have this Italian symphony by this composer, and then this Italian symphony by this other composer, a different gender. This is, I can see myself
Sure.
in this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Growing up, I literally never played a piece by a woman composer in an orchestra and a chamber ensemble. It was completely left out of education. And I went to quite a lot of music schools,
Yeah.
and none of them included any teaching and education or performing of women composers.
No. So part of also redefining the canon, I think, also goes to, you've talked about also audition excerpts. And this
Yeah.
is something people might not, or they wouldn't know at all.
Sure.
When you audition for an orchestra, there is a list of excerpts that they'll give you in the United States that you need to play, and they're pretty much, for the most part, like, quote unquote standard. All the standard stuff you have to play. It's stuff you have to be able to play at 2 a.m, sick,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. But there are so many pieces like that you do in auditions that you'll play once, maybe never.
Yeah.
It's just like, what's the point of this?
Yeah.
So why is it important to include music by women and gender nonconforming composers into audition excerpts?
Yeah, I think it goes right back to what you were talking about with representation and people being able to see themselves on the stage, being performed and being welcome into any community. And if you think about the entry point of any musician into an orchestra, it starts with education, first of all. And, going through even an undergrad music school, the standard excerpts by the time you get out of undergrad.
Oh, yeah.
Backwards and forwards. You
Yeah.
can play them without the music in your sleep. And if we can introduce pieces by women composers to that age group, to undergrad music students and people who are just entering the professional industry, we won't be having this conversation in the next generation. But also thinking about really how we're inviting audiences into not just the orchestras themselves, but into the audience to come to the performances. That, as a woman, if I see an audition list, a list of excerpts, and it includes someone who looks like me,
Yeah.
I want to take that audition.
Right.
And it, never occurred to me when I was actually at the stage in my career as a violinist that I had never seen an excerpt by a woman composer and had never been asked to learn anything by a woman composer.
I've never seen an excerpt for tuba by a woman composer ever. And there's plenty of tuba excerpts that you play, and it's like, what is the point of this?
Yeah, sure.
No one needs to hear this in an audition. This is pointless.
Well,
But-
we work with orchestral partners for redefining the canon. And, we have several partners now, Richmond Symphony and National Philharmonic, where I'm concert leader, Cincinnati, and a few others. And, they'll tell us they have a violin audition coming up and ask for suggestions and show us the list that they've been using and, really tell us kind of what they're looking for to add or maybe to substitute another one of their excerpts. And it's really a service that we provide for these orchestras.
So you're already seeing some change,
Absolutely.
in not just in what people are performing, but what they're using for, internal stuff like audition excerpts.
Yeah, for sure.
And the groups, and you've only been around Boulanger Initiative for, I think you said like 7 years, and COVID was, half that.
Yep.
So that's pretty encouraging to hear that there's been movement and change, but clearly, not enough.
There's a shift, and it's very slow. And, some of it continues to move forward, and I think some of it has stagnated. But I think about the first year at Boulanger Initiative and trying to come up with my top 10, my favorite albums of the year. And it was hard to find 10 albums that were exclusively music by women composers.
Yeah.
And now there's so much more of an
Yes.
abundance. And there are more orchestras and musicians and ensembles doing this work and really thinking about gender equity and being conscientious about doing this work.
I've seen, especially in chamber music in the Washington area, just an unimaginable shift in the last 10 years where I do get to hear music by Barbara Strozzi, and have it on Front Row Washington.
Yeah, and our motto, especially for the database, the heart of Boulanger Initiative is be curious and, thinking about the fact that orchestras really have to think about selling tickets, and they know that Beethoven 9 is going to sell, and they know that Mozart's going to sell, and they know that if they program certain things, they will sell tickets, and that revenue is critical for these organizations to survive. And there's a lot of hesitation around whether or not they can sell tickets if they program something that an audience hasn't heard of before. And I think that for the majority of people who love music, they are curious. They want to hear new music. And there is room to explore and expand what we program on stages.
So we have the database. We have the work you're doing with the orchestra partners, as you call them. You've got the curriculum, the Baroque edition. You also brought one with you that's something else, like another book.
Yeah.
And this can all be on the website that people can find more information.
Sure.
But also locally, there is something called WOCO Fest, and that'll be happening very soon.
Yeah,
Tell us about this.
That's coming up May 30th and 31st at Strathmore, the mansion at Strathmore this year. And it's a full weekend of tons of musical performances, panel discussions, sound installations, conversations, workshops.
Yoga with dogs? I think I saw yoga once.
We did yoga. It wasn't with dogs. We should do that probably next year. Or maybe goats. I've seen a lot of goat
goats.
yoga
Yeah.
recently. Maybe just getting, female goat. But WOCO Fest, WOCO standing for Women Composers, we have each spring in the DMV. And this year, it's a really fun lineup and really diverse. Everything from Baroque music to living composers. And every single thing that you'll hear during the weekend at the festival is written by women and gender-marginalized composers.
And as you said, it's like diverse. I mean, when I look at the past festivals and everything that you guys have done, it's like anything you could imagine. It's not just going and sitting into a concert, clapping and walking away. There's
absolutely
all
not.
kinds of things going on.
Yeah, and Boulanger Initiative really is classical music focused, but we go into many other genres and realms. Our opening concert is always a really big lineup of, we call it BI Friends and Family. And it's mostly local musicians, performers, artists who are doing all of, the good work of performing these works by gender-marginalized composers. So we'll have something like 24 performers in one concert. So you'll get to hear a sitar player before you hear a classical guitar, before you hear a string quartet play, and, all kinds of different kinds of performers and artists just within the first opening show.
Oh, I love it. So are there any specific people that you can mention that are going to be performing?
Absolutely. Some of my favorites, Public Quartet will be coming. They play a lot of really fun new music and, talking about a lot about improvisation. They do a lot of this kind of like funky genres, improvisation. They do a lot of really fun repertoire. So Public Quartet will be starting us off on May 31st, Saturday at Strathmore, and then working into a group called Tapestry, which is mostly Baroque focused, but we are going to do a program Baroque all the way up through the current day. And it's 3 vocalists and a piano. So something totally different from the string quartet in the first concert. And then we have a brass quintet, the first time ever. We have a brass quintet this year at WOCO Fest, and it's Seraph Brass.
Okay.
Seraph Brass is an all-women, all gender-marginalized brass quintet. And again, really diverse range of pieces that they'll be playing, pieces that go back hundreds of years all the way up through living composers again. And then Saturday night, May 31st, we will have Pamela Z, who is a composer performer, does a lot of work with electronics and really pushing boundaries.
Okay. So this is exciting. WOCO Fest, that's May 30th and 31st at the mansion at Strathmore. And they can find more information at
boulangerinitiative.org.
boulangerinitiative.org. And you're probably also on some other social media channels as well.
Absolutely. You can see us on Facebook and Instagram and all over the place. And our YouTube channel has a ton of videos from previous festivals and different things that you can go and explore and find music that you've never heard. And our Spotify channel has a lot of really really great playlists to explore as well.
Okay, we'll put some links to those on the show notes page too. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for joining me to talk all about this. It's been great to learn more about Boulanger Initiative and, of course, talking about Clarice Assad's music.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music. For more information on this episode, visit the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. You can send me comments and episode ideas to classicalbreakdown@weta.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review in your podcast app. I'm John Banther. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown from WETA Classical.